Welcome to Break the Loop, the place where shadows transform into personal power. Here we break the loop, shift timelines, and step into the highest version of ourselves. And today, we enter one of the most important teachings of the entire series. This is episode 12, Shadow to Gold, the Art of Alchemy, the process of transforming the very pattern that once held you back into a source of power, clarity, freedom, and identity. Everything you've learned so far has prepared you for this. Breaking the loop stops the pattern, but alchemizing the shadow transforms your life. You've learned how loops form, how emotional echoes activate, how your shadow shapes your reactions, how to interrupt patterns, how to stabilize new identities, and how timelines shift depending on your level of awareness. But none of this is the final step. The final step is transformation. The shadow does not disappear just because you understand it. The shadow dissolves when you use it. When you take the raw emotional material that once kept you stuck, fear, shame, anger, abandonment, rejection, and turn it into strength, clarity, boundaries, intuition, and authenticity. Alchemy is not the removal of shadow. Alchemy is the evolution of shadow. And today we begin the process of turning your shadow into gold. Psychologically, shadow alchemy begins when you stop treating your shadow as an enemy and start treating it as information. Your shadow reveals your unmet needs, shows you where emotional memory is still stored in the body, signals where your identity is outdated, and exposes the exact pattern ready for change. Whenever a loop appears, it is not evidence of failure. It is evidence that something inside you is ready to evolve. The moment you stop seeing the shadow as a flaw and start seeing it as feedback, you step into the role of the observer-creator. This is the moment where inner alchemy becomes possible. Neurologically, alchemy is the process of rewiring. Each time a loop activates, your amygdala sends signals to the body that say, "This is danger," even when the danger is emotional memory rather than present reality. When you practice conscious interruption, narrative collapse, and the identity switch, your brain begins building new pathways. Your prefrontal cortex takes the lead. Your nervous system learns how to create safety from the inside. Shadow alchemy is the moment where the threat response is replaced with awareness. Instead of running old emotional software, you begin installing new identity code. This is not metaphor. This is measurable neurological transformation. In quantum identity theory, the moment you shift your perception, you shift your reality. Every loop is tied to a timeline, a version of you who reacts the same way, thinks the same way, chooses the same way, and therefore lives the same life. But when you interrupt the loop and choose a different identity, you collapse the old timeline and activate a higher one. Alchemy is the collapse of the lower timeline and the selection of the higher. It is not magic, it is physics. It is awareness meeting energy, identity meeting possibility. It is the version of you trapped in a repeating emotional loop, stepping aside, so the version of you who lives from clarity and strength can emerge. This is quantum identity shift in action. Alchemy is not about becoming someone new. It is about unburdening who you truly are. The shadow is simply the part of you that learned how to survive. It learned how to protect you. It learned how to keep you safe. But the same strategies that once protected you are now the patterns holding you back. The shadow is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to protect you using outdated information. Alchemy begins when you say, "Thank you for keeping me safe, but I choose a new identity now." When you understand this, the emotional charge around your shadow softens. You stop fighting yourself. You begin integrating. And integration is where power returns. Shadow alchemy unfolds through three phases: exposure, integration, and transmutation. Exposure is the moment the shadow reveals itself through emotion, patterns, loops, triggers, projections, recurring fears, or relationships. Integration is when you allow yourself to feel the emotion consciously without collapsing into it. You breathe, you observe, you speak truth, and you remain anchored. Transmutation is when you extract the need, the lesson, the identity insight, and the truth behind the reaction, turning the raw emotional material into wisdom, boundaries, confidence, clarity, and personal power. This is not abstract. It is psychological and somatic transformation that becomes behavioral change. Every shadow contains gold. Fear contains intuition. Anger contains boundaries. Shame contains unmet needs and missing self-acceptance. Sadness contains emotional truth. Envy contains desire and direction. Avoidance contains exhaustion and lack of capacity. People-pleasing contains a longing for belonging. Attachment patterns contain the yearning for real connection. Every shadow emotion mirrors the next evolution of your identity. When you meet the shadow with awareness, the gold reveals itself naturally. Shadow alchemy follows a clear formula: shadow, then insight, then identity. First, you meet the shadow with awareness. Then you decode what the shadow is trying to protect. Then you upgrade the identity based on the insight. This is where emotional triggers transform into emotional mastery, where fear becomes clarity, shame becomes truth, abandonment becomes self-connection, and the old identity dissolves so the higher one can emerge. This is the blueprint for turning shadow into power. Imagine someone who collapses into fear whenever uncertainty appears. Their shadow says, something bad is going to happen. But when they pause, breathe, and observe, they realize the fear isn't about the present, it's emotional memory. They ask, what is the gold here? And the answer becomes clear. Fear is actually intuition. It is highlighting where something matters. It is showing where expansion is happening. It is revealing growth, not danger. When alchemized, fear becomes guidance instead of paralysis. Now imagine someone who reacts with anger every time they feel misunderstood or controlled. Old identity says, defend yourself, but the gold inside anger is not aggression, it is boundaries. The anger points to a need, a truth, or a line being crossed. When alchemized, anger becomes assertion instead of aggression, clarity instead of conflict, and self-respect instead of reactivity. This is how anger becomes power. Shame is one of the deepest shadows. It tells you you are not enough, but shame is simply the emotion that appears when you are disconnected from your truth. Shame shows you where you have been abandoning yourself to stay acceptable or safe. When alchemized, shame becomes authenticity. It becomes self-expression. It becomes the freedom to be seen without collapsing. The gold inside shame is the understanding that your worth is inherent, not conditional. Shadow abandonment says, I need someone to save me, but the gold inside abandonment says, I can hold myself. You learn to sit with your emotional experience, regulate your nervous system, and meet your own needs. When abandonment is alchemized, relationships become healthier because they come from wholeness instead of fear. This shift changes everything. Alchemy is not complete until identity shifts. Shadow alchemy reveals truth, but you must still choose the identity aligned with that truth. You ask, who is the version of me that already lives this insight? And then you step into that identity. This is where psychology meets quantum identity theory, where emotional insight activates the timeline shift. You are not removing the shadow. You are metabolizing it, using it, evolving through it. This is the art of becoming your higher self. Alchemy becomes effortless when practiced daily. You ask yourself, what emotion is alive in me? What shadow is appearing? What is the gold inside it? What version of me responds from truth instead of fear? Then you breathe, ground yourself, feel the emotional impulse without collapsing into it. Speak the truth of the moment and choose the version of yourself aligned with your highest timeline. This is how you anchor your higher self into your daily life. Alchemy is not complete until the body feels the shift. Your mind may understand the insight, but if your body still holds the emotional memory, the loop returns. Somatic integration is essential. You breathe into the part holding tension, allow the contraction to release, reposition your posture into the identity you are choosing, and feel the new version of yourself emerging. This is where transformation becomes embodied. Alchemy ends with embodiment. You act from the new identity, speak from it, respond from it, and choose from it. You break the loop not by thinking differently, but by becoming differently. When your behavior aligns with your insight, the loop dissolves. When emotional patterns no longer dictate your choices, you activate a higher timeline. This is the moment where shadow becomes power. And now we close episode 12, the heart of the shadow to power journey. Shadow does not disappear. Shadow becomes gold when you meet it with awareness, softness, honesty, and choice. In the next episode, episode 13, we explore why loops sometimes return even after the work, and how to stay anchored in your higher identity when life tests you. Until then, break the loop, shift the timeline, and become your higher self.